Hi everybody, Britt Davenport coming to you from Lewiston, Idaho. Today we're going to be tying a Fly Du Jour. This is a steelhead pattern that was introduced in 1990 by Mark Bachman for the Deschutes River, where the name originated. Two groups had had success on it over a couple of weeks, and unbeknowingly they both called it the Fly Du Jour, or Fly of the Day, and the name just kind of stuck. This fly uses a material that I've really come to love, which is called Edge Bright. So today we'll be using the fluorescent pink variety. And let's get started. So this is the finished fly in the vise. I'm going to remove that. Today we will be tying on a size 4 Gamakatsu T10 6H. And I've already crimped the barb on that. So go ahead and mount the hook in our vise. We're using red A-dot Semper Fly Classic Wax thread. So I'm going to start by dressing the hook shank. Now the very first material we're going to be tying in is a strip of that pink Edge Bright material. Now it comes in a large sheet like this, and you can use either your scissors or a rotary tool to cut that into about 1/8 of an inch strip. And then where we're tying it in at, I'm going to actually cut a notch of this out. And that just gives us a little bit nicer tie-in point without so much bulk. And then it also allows where we start wrapping it to be just a little bit neater. So go in and cut just that little notch in there like that. And we're going to want the Edge Bright material to start just about where the hook point is, or not the hook point, excuse me, the barb. So we're going to go ahead and lash that in. And I'm going to advance my thread back up towards the front of the fly. Now we're going to be wrapping that Edge Bright over silver mylar tinsel. So I'm going to just take off a pretty good length of this. Make sure not to short yourself because we're going to wrap down and back. And this will also be our tag on the fly. So make sure you have a pretty good length of it. So we're going to tie this in. We're going to have the gold side facing us. That way when we wrap it, the silver will be facing outward. And if you can see, I left just a little bit out right there. I'm going to wrap over that and fold that back on top of itself just a hair. And then wrap over top of that. And what that does is that really locks that material in. It can be a little slippery, so it really locks that in. So I'm going to go ahead and throw a half hitch in there just to save our work. Take our bobbin and move it over to our thread post. And then I'm going to just put a real light quick coat of Sally Hansen Hard as Nails on that, just to help the durability of the pattern. Going to do that first wrap by hand just to make sure that the material is laying with the silver side facing up. Then I'm just going to take touching wraps going towards the rear of the hook. When we get to that edge bright material, I'm going to just lift it up and just jump around to the rear of that and do a few wraps for a tag. And then just wrap right back up. And then again, jump back around it. And then just continue wrapping it back to that tie-in point. Then we'll go ahead and tie that down. Give it a couple good securing wraps. And again, I'm going to go back and just fold it over on itself just a hair and just a few wraps right on top of that. And that will keep that material from pulling out. So now I'm going to go ahead and throw a half hitch in just to save our work. We'll take our thread and move it over to our bobbin post. And so now we're going to be wrapping that edge bright over that material. And when you wrap this, you want it to overlap itself about halfway. Just try to get nice, consistent wraps as you work your way up the fly. And once you get to the, I'll just go ahead and tie that off. And don't worry too much about how this tie-off point looks. We're going to be dubbing over that. So if it doesn't look too good, don't worry about it. And then when I cut that, I'm just taking small snips. That way it's a little bit more tapered and gradual rather than just a straight cut across the top of it. I'm just gonna wrap that butt end down good. And like I said, we're going to be dubbing over this here in just a minute, so no worries there. So now we're going to tie in a silver rib. I'm just using silver oval tinsel. I'm going to tie that in on the near side of the hook. Make sure that's secured down nice and tight. For dubbing, we're going to use a mix of Davy Lawton SLF in Kingfisher blue and purple. So to mix those, I took a few pinches of each and put them in a coffee grinder and just pulsated it a few times, and I got a nice just mixture of the two now. So I'm gonna just put a half hitch in here real quick. Next up, we'll be dubbing this thorax. And this dubbing is really slippery, so I'm going to just put just ever so slightly a bit of wax on that thread just to help me get it started. Now to dub it the Nor-vise way, we're going to just feather that out some. We want this dubbing to be nice and loose. That way it'll just pull it right off of the thread, or right off our fingers onto the thread. So I'm going to loosen my tension nut. Oop. Actually, let me clip that rib down. There we go. So I'm just going to put some dubbing on the thread there, and it just kind of jumps right out of my hand. We'll probably need a little bit more than that. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab another clump and just add to that. Now it's pretty loose right now. So what I'm going to do now is just pinch that thread and then continue to spin the vise so it then tightens that dubbing up. Now we're ready to apply it to the thorax of the fly. I've also tightened my tension nut back down. Kind of got a bit of a blob of it right there, so I'm just gonna spin that there. There we go. A little bit better. So we're just building up a nice thorax to the fly. And I'm going to put just a little bit more in there. Loosen that tension nut. Go ahead and give it a spin. Let that dubbing just jump right onto the thread. And just build just a little bit more there in the front. Just another half hitch in there, and now we're going to rib that thorax area, put our thread post over on our bobbin post, and I'm just going to counter wrap that. Try to just get a few nice evenly spaced wraps, and then tie that off. In there, I just broke my thread off on that tinsel, so I'll just tie that back in. No worries. I don't ever break my thread, do y'all? I do it all the time. All right, there we go. So next up, the collar is going to be just a purple saddle hackle. So I'm going to go ahead and strip those fluffy fibers off the bottom of it. I'm just going to cut that off and make a nice little tie-in point. So lash that down. Now I like to preen those fibers back. You can also use the edge of your scissors and just run it along them, and it helps those barbules to go towards the rear of the fly. And now we're just going to take 1.5 to 2 wraps. Doesn't have to be very many. And then rather than cutting that spare off right now, we're going to hold it back and just wrap it, and it just kind of dog legs it a bit, so there's no way that feather is going to pull out. Trim it out, And the very last thing we're going to do is we're going to use some white calf tail for the wing. So I'm just gonna trim out a small clump. It doesn't have to be a ton. Clean those fluffies out, any stray short fibers. Then I'm just going to put it in my hair stacker, give it a few taps. Even up those tips as best we can. That's not always easily done with calf tail, but get them as close as we can. Then take a measurement. We want that tail, or that wing, excuse me, to go to about the rear of the hook. So go ahead and take that measurement, transfer hands, and then trim off those butt sections. I'm going to spin my thread counterclockwise, which will make the thread actually jump to the rear of the fly. So I'm going to put in some wraps. Make sure we have that positioned how we want it. And then I've also found that if you lift that wing up, once you have it secured fairly well, and then take a wrap behind it, and then just a few more wraps in front of it, that really helps secure that wing so it doesn't go anywhere. The final step is we're just going to add a few strands of crystal flash to the top of that wing. So I've got 2 strands. I'm going to double those around my thread and pull it up on top of it. And then we're just going to double those back on themselves. By doing that, it's very unlikely that they would pull out, and we get twice as much for the price. So those those pieces of crystal flash you want to extend just beyond that wing. So go ahead and trim those off. And now we can go ahead and put a half hitch on. Excuse me, a whip finish, goodness. Or a half hitch, whatever floats your boat. Do that. I've got just a few pieces of hair in the eye there, so I'm gonna trim those out. Should have been a bit more careful when I was tying that wing in, but it's been a long day. There we go, get those out of the way. I'm just gonna put a coat of Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails on. You can use lacquer, you can use UV, whatever floats your boat. All right. And there we have it, a Fly Du Jour. Again, created by Mark Bachman over on the Deschutes River. It's been quite successful in a number of places around the world.